Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of House to Home, a podcast by Family Policy Alliance Foundation. My name is Grace Youngson, and I'm so excited to be back on the show with my co-host, Joseph Kohm, who is our policy director here at FPAF. And today we're going to be talking to you about a story which has not been widely reported on yet, but it is the recent launch of Nucleus Genome's newest technology that has some very dangerous eugenic implications. Joseph, can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, I'd like to, Grace. Great to be back on the show with you, as always. Hello to our audience. But yeah, this is a very serious story that has really flown under the radar, considering its implications, which we are going to tackle head on for this show. So as you summarized there, Grace, this is a company called Nucleus Genome, and they launched a new technology that they call, quote, the nucleus embryo, end quote. They're launching it here at the end of June 2025 at the time of recording. So this technology is a whole genome sequencing that analyzes the DNA of an embryo, and the analysis looks for the possibility of over 900 hereditary diseases, the potential for cancers, various aspects of neurological health like Alzheimer's, anxiety, bipolar disorder, insomnia, and so forth. And it goes beyond just health. It looks at appearance, intelligence, and simple things like whether the child will be left or right-handed. These screenings can be done on an entire selection of embryos, and then the parent can compare the embryo's health, appearance, and intelligence before choosing which to implant. So this takes really the concept of designer babies to a totally new height, Grace. I don't think anyone could really have conceived of until this. There's a similar technology available from another company called Orchid Incorporated, which launched back in April 2025. So that's a summary of the story. We're going to talk a lot about the implications of it. I do want to credit FBA's summer legal intern, Mary Truitt, for her excellent research on this story that draws on multiple different outlets. But I do want to give special recognition to a piece by John Daniel Davidson at the Federalist, which we'll link to in here and what we have leaned on in some ways for our analysis here. So, Grace, now that I've described to you this wild piece of sci-fi technology and baby screening, just tell me what you think.
Yeah, I think my first reaction is more of a personal one. My little brother was actually diagnosed with Down syndrome when he was born, and to think that people would want to screen him out is really sad. He is the most fun-loving, joyful, most pure-hearted person I know. And even I learn so much from him, and just the way that he is always has a positive outlook on life. And I think that it's really sad that we place less value, and not just less value, but actually would kill someone. And I think what I found even more interesting about what you read through was like, it even talks about whether they're left or right-handed. That is completely like no reason to kill a person. So I find it really sad. And I think that the implications of this kind of thing are extremely dangerous, because you're really trying to manufacture some perfect thing. Life isn't perfect anyway. And part of the joy of life is that it isn't perfect. So that would be my first reaction. And I would love to hear yours as well.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for sharing that about your family, Grace. I think that's tremendously powerful and brings the personally down to earth for me as your co-host, and I think for our audience members, and kind of dovetails with my reaction that I had one that I thought of, but just listening to you talk, I couldn't ever compare myself to your brother, but when I was learning that they could also screen out for certain disorders like anxiety, Grace, I'm someone who lives with clinical social anxiety, and the Lord's been really gracious to me in terms of learning how to live with it, and to the point where it really doesn't affect my day-to-day life. But it does make you wonder, for someone like me, would they have been able to see that in me if I had been an embryo? Would I have been screened out for that? I don't know. And yet I know that I'm made in the image of God, just like your brother, and deserving of that dignity. So this is really personal to a lot of people. And your story about your brother, even just my tertiary thoughts about myself, I think can bring this home for people. Well, Grace, let's start here with the basics that I know our audience will really want to hear us tackle head on, which is the fact that this is eugenics. The CEO of this company is going out of his way to very publicly message on this technology by trying to say it's not eugenics, it's actually preventative medicine. I find that quite hubristic of him to say, but this is clearly eugenics, Grace. What do you think about it? I mean, tell our audience a little bit about how it's eugenics, and I'll add some too.
100%. Well, I think that to say that it's preventative medicine, the life has already been created. An embryo is a life. And so you're not preventing anything. There is already a human being right there. So from that standpoint, that's completely a wrong claim. And I think that it's really interesting because, I mean, eugenics is basically placing a value on a person according to their performance in a way. And it's interesting that you brought up even how, you have maybe struggled with some social anxiety. I think every single person struggles with something. That would just wipe out everyone. You can find a reason, whether someone is left-handed or right-handed, like, oh my goodness, you can find a reason to kill someone, basically. And it makes me think back to Hitler's Germany, because the way he started out, and a lot of people don't know this, but he didn't start out just going after the Jews. He actually started out performing eugenics experiments on disabled children. And what happened was, there was some controversy around it. Some people were like, okay, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. Other people bought into the idea that, okay, this is just this issue over here. It's not going to affect the rest of the population. It doesn't have further implications than just these disabled children. And then actually, once Hitler had gained that foothold and he had started to numb people's minds towards the atrocity of what he was doing, he was then able to persuade people that they should kill millions of Jews. And I just think that has something to say for how this is not just about this issue. And I mean, Hitler wanted to create a blonde hair, blue-eyed race. He would have had to have killed himself for that, so that's kind of sad. But it's like you're trying to create this perfect person. And, God made every single one of us different. And God made us different in a beautiful way. And the Bible talks about, actually in Psalms, it's one of my favorite scriptures. It says that his thoughts of us outnumber the sands in the sea. That is how many good, beautiful thoughts God has of us. Who are we to start terming people who God thinks about that many amazing thoughts as unfit to live?
Yeah, it relocates what gives us innate value to being our traits, and then that makes the value system come back inward to ourselves, because it's presuming that we as fellow humans value value certain traits in our fellow humans more than others. And that makes our worth based around that, rather than what we as Christians believe, which is that our value is based on bearing the image of God. And everyone bears that, no matter what you struggle with or don't struggle with, how physically gifted you are or not, or how smart you are or not. Everybody bears that image of God, and that's what gives everyone inherent value, not what traits certain people like and certain people don't. Well, Grace, I like that you keep mentioning that this can even distinguish between left and right-handedness, because I have a thought on that. Listeners can probably tell from behind me, I'm a big sports fan. My dad raised me to be an athlete and to love sports, and one of the athletes he raised me and my sister to really admire is the great baseball player Ted Williams. He's considered one of the greatest hitters ever in Major League Baseball. And I don't say this to beat up on him. He didn't know any better, and I'm sure his estate planners did this. But when he passed away, he had some of his DNA frozen for the future. He passed away in, I think, 2000. So all this technology was in its infancy, if it existed at all back then. But he had some of his DNA frozen. And the idea was, looking forward, they could either, maybe not reincarnate him, but at least screen the kind of genetic traits that he had helped to make him such a good hitter, like his athleticism, his hand-eye coordination. But one thing Ted Williams was is he batted left-handed. The thing about sports is in almost all sports, at least in America, left-handed people are really valued in athletics because they're rarer and because most sports have two sides to them. And it's better to have right-handed people play on the right side of the field and left-handed people play on the left side of the field. I remember this in hockey when I was right stick and I struggled to play in the left wing because it was harder to get my stick into the corner to play the puck. And that's true pretty much across the gamut in sports. Left-handed people are really prized, particularly in baseball, especially because there's fewer right-handed or left-handed hitters, and it's harder for pitchers to pitch to them. So that's how devious the selection can get. Is say you're a parent who wants to give yourself a best chance to have a star athlete child. One of the first things you're going to do is screen out right-handedness, and maybe if it's possible, screen for ambidextrousness because again, Ted Williams, he batted left, but he threw right. So that's, to me, incredibly devious because the whole point, I think, of our giftings from God is that God gives us in unique ways. And it's not just down to physical attributes that make one a great athlete. Ted Williams also served his country in the Navy's Air Corps, I believe, in World War II, was a great fighter pilot. That took incredible grit, character, courage, the things you cannot screen for, the things that only God can give you and know about. And I think the dangers from all of this speak for themselves because of how trivial it could get. If all you're screening for your child is what could make you a star athlete, that's a world I'd be scared to live in.
I 100% agree. And it's so interesting that you also talked about the character side of things, because I'm sure obviously physical attributes play a big part. But I remember I think it's actually a funny story. My ballet teacher was telling me about how she used to watch this Navy SEALs, this program about the Navy SEALs, and a question that was posed to one of the captains, I'm not quite sure what the exact term is, but he was asked, how do you know, can you tell who's going to make it through this tough boot camp and who doesn't? And his response was absolutely nothing to do with physical attributes. He actually said that those who make it through are actually those who care about their fellow men in the first part. And he sees that, and he sees a character in them. And I find that so interesting because obviously that cannot be screened for. And also what often builds character is adversity. Often a lot of people who do not have life on a plate are actually much tougher than people who do, because you have to be tough to make it through those things, and it builds resilience in you. And so I think another thing that I found so interesting.
Real quick, Grace, just know that resonates with me because I'm a graduate of Virginia Military Institute, which is one of the last true military colleges in the country. I can tell you stories of brother rats, classmates I had who were physically gifted, didn't make it. People who weren't physically gifted, but they had mental toughness, kind of thing only God can give you, the innate trait. And that really is true. That resonates with me. I think most people listening, they will innately know that to be true because they face some adversity in life themselves.
I totally agree. I mean, even in athletics, even when you hear Olympians talk about training and stuff, and even I love Wimbledon. And when you hear sometimes, or when you watch a match, you can tell who's mentally losing the game. It's not really always a physical competition. It's kind of who can mentally tough it out. And so I totally agree with you. Another thing that I found interesting was I'm not sure if she's the founder or co-founder of Orchid, which you mentioned earlier. And it's a woman. She posted a video on X saying that sex is for fun and embryo screening is for babies. And I mean, I have like two issues with that. The first part, there's no denying that sex itself is a fun thing, but the way that she's phrased that is linking its purpose only to fun. And the problem is when you start to have that mindset, you then place a lot less value on its reproductive capability because you're just seeing sex for that one thing. And that's really concerning. When our culture is starting to buy into some of that, it's going to numb you out to the fact that this actually could produce a life that you have responsibility for. But more than that, I find it really sad as a woman that that's her perspective, because I think, especially as women, we are created to be more emotionally linked to a person. And that is part of the reason why our drive is more in that direction when it comes to sex. We're created to bond and to create a family and to be mothers and wives. And so when you sort of relegate it back to that, you're creating a fake. You're creating something that doesn't exist. And it's the same with this whole embryo screening thing. You're trying to create like a perfect world, but in reality, you're creating something that, one, doesn't really exist, and two, is not where happiness is found. And I think it's really crazy as well that she does acknowledge that it is a baby, because she says embryo screening is for babies. By implication, this is a human being that we're going to now screen and see whether they should live or not.
Yeah.
That is sad.
I mean, that's what Christian truth and Christian scripture says, is that the moment of fertilization, which is a fertilized embryo in a test tube, at that moment, we have a unique human life that God has created in his image. And so you're right, at least she acknowledges that. But I agree with you on the concerns, Grace, especially in the sense that you say they're trying to make their sense of a perfect world. Well, that might be one person's sense of a perfect world. God has already created a world that is good. It's tainted by sin right now. He's going to redeem it. But at the very least, I mean, he gave us sex in part to foster procreation. And to see a woman so openly try to decouple sex completely from the thing that makes her most a woman, and that God, at least in part, created sex for, it's shocking. It's like the pinnacle of science mixed with sexual revolution ideology, which just promised everybody sex without consequences. And I think more and more what we're seeing is that there's no world in which sex can exist without consequences. I mean, if this is what sex without consequences looks like, these are heavy consequences, if for no one else than for the fertilized embryos and those lives. So I think it's been a heavy show so far. We're going to take a little bit of a break and then come back and address some counter arguments.
We believe you were born for such a time as this. Our ministry exists to empower you to understand your identity in Christ, discover your gifts and calling through intentional discipleship, and to launch you out as a leader in your community. We're not just here to talk about faith, we're here to live it out. That means engaging culture. That means leading with truth. And yes, that means stepping into spaces that shape our world, including government. Whether you're an artist, an entrepreneur, a teacher, a nurse, or anything in between, government affects your life. Policies and laws shape the culture you work in, the freedoms you have, and the values that get promoted. That's why it's not enough to sit on the sidelines. We need young Christians running for office, serving on school boards, working in public policy, and voting with a biblical worldview. We need you to care. Because as Proverbs 29:2 says, when godly people lead, the people rejoice. This generation has the passion, the voice, the boldness. Now it's time to match that with truth, discipleship, and purpose. So here's the call. Pray, vote, engage. Be disciples, be leaders. Let's raise up next-gen leaders who carry Christ into culture and shape the future of our nation, starting with you. Join the movement of 1630 and lead the change.
Well, we're back, and we just want to make a note that we're aware that eugenics is definitely a pretty broad issue. There's a lot that could be said on this, and we're aware that in a podcast, we don't have enough time to really get into everything. So we're really just giving you the bottom line, scratching the surface, and hopefully opening your eyes and sparking some curiosity to do some research yourself. You know, these podcasts are not just where you should get all your information from. We're hoping that this sparks curiosity, that you can look on our website, our partners' websites, and actually educate yourself even more. So, Joseph, tell us a little bit about the counter arguments surrounding this and how you approach those.
Yeah, I'd love to. And like you said, direct our audience to, if you want to learn more about this overall issue and the issue of unborn life, they should visit our website and check out our After Row campaign. They'll find just voluminous amounts of resources on this issue and others relating to the life sphere. So anyway, like you said, Grace, we're in deep waters here, and we just want to tread water for a little bit, give our audience a taste, and then we'll hop out and finish the show. But we do want to address two prominent arguments from this side of the ledger. and why we think they're false flags and they're not true eventually. We've touched on one already, which is the notion that this is preventative medicine. You screen out for these diseases, you're preventing people from having them in the first place. And the founder of Nucleus Genomes, the CEO, is really heavily messaging on that, which, he's got to do to his shareholders probably. So he probably has to find some way to message on this and counter it. But it is eugenics, as we said, Grace. So I just wanted to mention, I remember finding in our research that Mary did for us, she found this great tweet from the conservative Catholic commentator online, Michael Knowles, where he said, "To be clear, this technology does not help you extend your baby's life. The idea of preventative medicine, I think, does entail a part of surviving longer in a healthier fashion." He says, "This technology does not help you do that. It provides information, and dubious information at that, to help you kill your weakest child." And I find that pretty succinctly dispenses with this argument. This is preventative medicine, Grace. The whole point of preventative medicine is to do no harm. And yet this information, the only purpose of providing it is so that we can weed out what human beings might consider the quote-unquote weakest link in this set of embryos. So I don't know. What do you think about it, Grace? That was my first thought when just dispensing with this faux argument once and for all.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the way that Michael Knowles summed that up is very powerful and definitely emotional in that sense. It kind of makes me think, and this is obviously completely different from humans, but when there's like a runt of the litter with puppies, your heart is actually drawn to take care of that puppy even more and protect them. You don't just be like, oh, well, it's the runt, let's put it out and die. No, it's like, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take extra special care. Maybe I'm going to bottle feed this one if it's not latching just yet. Like, you're taking extra care. And even when we look at babies, we have preemies, we have intensive care units with amazing technology to be able to help these little ones when they've been born earlier than they should have been. Like, we put so much effort into those lives, even if, and a lot of the times if it's a preemie, there are a lot of complications. You don't just leave that baby to die. And so I think that it really, I think just from an aspect as well, and coming from like a woman's heart too, I think that this really goes against family values. And even for men and women, it completely goes against what God has put inside of us from a mother standpoint, from a father standpoint, that innate desire to nurture, to protect, to love. This is numbing us out to that. And it's really concerning because those values are from God, and family is a picture of his amazing sacrificial love towards us. And so when we're allowing all these different lies to come in, we're also killing the manifestation of God's love in the world. And so, I mean, I think that the argument that it's preventative is completely gone out the window. And it's really about killing someone, which is really sad.
It's pretty much the epitome of being unhuman, what it doesn't mean to be human. So, which leads me into the other counter argument that we really do want to just at least make a note of for our audience and give some basic principles for, which is you hear FPA defend what we term parental rights all the time, which is a real thing and deserves and needs to be defended in the world we live in. But I can already hear the people in the halls of power saying to us now, you're in favor of parental rights until certain circumstances, and this is one. They would say, shouldn't it be a parent's right to choose which embryos they allow to grow and develop into humans? And if that's based on information like this, isn't that a parent's right? So I find that argument to be repulsive, and I'll give just a quick example why, Grace. When I was studying English literature at VMI, I had a great English professor told me that there are basically 4 pillars of Western literature and culture. And they were kind of the ones you'd immediately think of, like Beowulf, the works of Shakespeare, Canterbury Tales. Okay. But then he told me Frankenstein by Mary Shelley was one. I didn't understand this until I read it, but it really is true. Because the whole point of Frankenstein is almost the exact inverse of this technology. It's a scientist piecing together body parts from dead people to create a new human life. And the whole theme of the story is that man cannot usurp what is God's obligation and power. Man cannot create except through what God gives him to create, whereas God creates out of nothing. And throughout the book, it's a very powerful, very sad book, but if you haven't read it, I recommend it because it's so revealing and so prescient for today, as you can tell from what we're studying. And throughout the book, there's a lot of tension of whether the monster should see Dr. Frankenstein as his parent or not. And so to me, what that illustrates in the inverse here, which we're seeing in this technology, is parental rights always stop where harm begins. And the reality is that if you're a Christian, you believe in the pro-life truth, both scientifically and theologically, then every fertilized embryo is a unique human life carrying the image of God. And you do not have a right, no one has a right, particularly parents don't have a right to destroy those lives simply because they don't have traits that you might particularly find desirable or might require a little bit of extra effort for you to take care of because the world considers them weak. So for me, I think parental rights is, again, a false flag, and one that I find really repulsive because there are real parental rights elements that are under assault in our society, and FPAF works very hard to defend them. This is not one of them.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think you summed it up perfectly, that parental rights end where harm begins. And there's really nothing more to say than that.
I appreciate your affirmation there, Grace. So I think it's worth just ending on a note to our audience saying that we've talked a lot about weakness and strength, at least in the world's minds here in this show. But at the end of the day, we serve a God in Jesus Christ who became weak himself to save the rest of us, who has special regard for the weak, the downtrodden, the less fortunate, those in the world that the strong look on as weak but still bear his image. That's who Christ became to save all of us. He was the God who won by dying and then rising again. So I think it's appropriate for us to tackle this subject and to equip our audience as best we can, humbly, to do it in their own world. So thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of House to Home, which is a podcast by Family Policy Alliance Foundation. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to it to get the latest episode in your feed every week. And if you like the show, you can get more analysis like this and topics like this from FPAF at our social media. Our handle is at family_policy on all major social media platforms. So I've been Joseph Kohm alongside Grace Youngson. As always, we will see you again next week.